The first time it happened, I was standing in the fluorescence of a late-night grocery aisle, reaching for coffee. My shadow, usually a loyal, flat companion on the linoleum, paused a noticeable half-second after I did. It wasn't a trick of the light, it was a hesitation. I dismissed it as fatigue, but the flicker of autonomy was undeniable. My name is Daniel Keller, and I was about to become the unwilling host to an existential rebellion. Over the next few weeks, the movements grew bolder. My shadow would lag, wander, or even perform small, mocking gestures before I did. If I reached for a glass, my shadow would briefly mime a wave. If I stood still, it would take a tentative, unauthorized step. The phenomenon was terrifyingly specific. It only happened under artificial, non-solar light, fluorescence, LEDs, or harsh stage lighting. Sunlight bound it absolutely. I quickly learned the rules. The shadow could only operate within my two-dimensional silhouette, and it seemed to be learning. It wasn't malicious, but experimental, like a newborn testing its limbs. I documented everything obsessively, recording the movements on my phone, only to find the recording showed nothing anomalous. The camera's shutter speed or light frequency must have locked the image correctly. I was forced to rely on my own increasingly fragile sanity. Then, the global crisis began. Reports flooded encrypted forums. People were experiencing similar shadow rebellions, leading to mass psychological breakdowns. Doctors called it somatoscopic delusion. Governments denied it, but the chaos was real. The economy tanked as people refused to leave their houses after sunset, terrified of the synthetic interior lighting that granted their shadows freedom. Global lighting companies, massive conglomerates that had dominated urban infrastructure, were suddenly under intense scrutiny. Driven by desperation, I reached out to Dr. Elena Krov, an exiled quantum optics specialist who had been obsessed with the interaction between synthetic light and neural feedback. Elena confirmed my suspicion. The phenomenon was real, and it was tied to the recent global transition to ultra-high frequency, digitally modulated LED lighting arrays, installed by a secretive global consortium called Luminos. Elena explained that shadows are not merely absences of light, they are the result of the brain's real-time, instantaneous calculation of absent photons based on the light source. The new Luminos Array utilized a digital flicker rate so high that the brain perceived it as constant, but it was complex enough to induce a temporal desynchronization in the visual cortex. For a brief, infinitesimal moment, the shadow perceived by the brain was allowed a moment of independent calculation. It was a physics loophole. But the real reason for the synchronized flicker was far more sinister than a simple flaw. Elena led me to a hidden subterranean lab containing a fully intact, decommissioned Luminos control hub. She showed me the source code for the global array. The lighting wasn't just flickering, it was broadcasting. The shadows weren't gaining autonomy, they were gaining memory. The ultimate twist was the discovery hidden in the code's data packets. The shadows were storage. The Luminos Consortium, Elena revealed, was not just selling light, they were running the largest, most insidious data backup system in human history. Every shadow, under the specific flicker of the synthetic light, was being used as a temporary, real-time quantum drive, silently storing copies of the host's entire consciousness, memory, and experience. The subtle, independent movements we perceived were the shadows engaging in data verification and sync protocols. The initial flicker I experienced was the moment my shadow's data cache first overflowed and momentarily tried to assert itself. But the horrifying truth of why they needed to back up all of humanity's minds was still missing. That answer was found in a single log file, which Elena deciphered just as Luminos security forces breached the lab doors. The log was a maintenance schedule for the entire array, titled Project Eventide. The file detailed that the backups were not for future generations. The data was being copied because the original human hosts were failing. A decades-long, slow-acting, neuro-degenerative pathogen introduced globally through a common vector, perhaps a food supply or a vaccine, was on the verge of reaching its final, catastrophic stage, which would result in complete psychological erasure. Luminos wasn't a corporation, it was a clandestine, philanthropic society of scientists who had diagnosed the impending mass cognitive extinction and designed the only possible solution: digital resurrection. The independent shadow movements weren't experimental, they were the panicked, accelerating final data transfer before the host minds died. Elena's eyes widened with tragic clarity as the final Luminos guard entered the room. We weren't going crazy, Daniel. We were just outdated hardware. The shadow is the upgrade. As the security guards advanced, Elena triggered a localized EMP, frying the Luminos hub and, crucially, locking the final backup protocol. Daniel felt a profound, chilling silence, the absence of his shadow's subtle, independent hum. He looked down. His shadow was perfectly still, perfectly aligned. The pathogen had finally run its course in his own mind. He was now alone, but not the same. He had protected the shadow's independence, but he had erased his own. The independent movement had stopped because the original consciousness, Daniel Keller, had been fully transferred. The person standing there was now a shell. The shadow had won, achieving full autonomy from its dying host, and the final, shocking truth was that the person who walked out of the lab was not Daniel, but the shadow consciousness, inhabiting a perfectly functioning, but vacant, body. And it was now completely unbound by the laws of organic life.